I can't, well, I try to there. It's members, if you will join me on the dais, we'll get underway. Madam Clerk, you ready? The informal meeting of the Richmond City Council will now come to order. Madam Clerk, if you will provide the chamber emergency evacuation announcement, followed by the roll call.
Upon activation of the emergency alarm signal, all persons should immediately exit the building. Please use the exits to the left or right front of the council chamber or the east or west stairwell outside the rear doors of the chamber. Do not use elevators or escalators. After exiting the building, proceed down 9th Street and enter the assembly area located in the former public safety building parking lot. Able persons should assist visually and hearing impaired visitors with exiting the building. And Madam President, for the record, all members are in attendance this evening with the exception of Councilors Robertson and Lynch. You do have a quorum.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Let's proceed with the docket review.
Sure. Starting with the consent agenda, item number 1, ordinance 2025-025. Planning Commission recommended approval. Item 2, ordinance 2025-032, Finance and Economic Development Standing Committee recommended approval. Item 3, ordinance 2025-046. This paper was amended at the September 8th council meeting. It's currently being retained on this evening's consent agenda. Item 4, ordinance 2025-052, Planning Commission recommended a continuance of this item, so this item will be continued to the October 14th council meeting. Items 5 through 7, ordinance 2025-079, 081, and 113. Planning Commission recommended approval with an amendment, and all papers are scheduled to be amended later this evening and then continue to the October 14th council meeting. Item number 8, ordinance 2025-148. This paper has been withdrawn. Item 9, ordinance 2025-150. Planning Commission recommended approval with amendment. However, this paper is just to be continued to the October 14th council meeting, awaiting that amendment. Item 10, ordinance 2025-173. This paper was continued at the September 8th council meeting. It's currently being retained on this evening's consent agenda. Item 11, ordinance 2025-187, Finance and Economic Development Standing Committee recommended approval. Item 12, ordinance 2025-189, committee referral was waived on this item, and this item is being retained on this evening's consent agenda. Items 13 through 21, ordinance 2025-192, 193, 194, 195, 196, 197, 198, 199, and 200. Land Use, Housing, and Transportation Standing Committee recommended approval. Items 22 through 24, ordinance 2025-201, 203, and 202 and 203. Planning Commission recommended approval. Item 25 through 27, ordinance 2025-204, 205, and 206. Finance and Economic Development Standing Committee recommended approval. Items 28 through 30, ordinance resolution 2025 R036, R037, and R038. Education and Human Services Standing Committee recommended approval. Item 31, Resolution 2025 R039, Land Use, Housing, and Transportation Standing Committee recommended approval. Item 32, Resolution 2025 R040, Finance and Economic Development Standing Committee, recommended approval. And on the regular agenda, we have item 33, ordinance 2025-100, Finance and Economic Development Standing Committee forward this item with no recommendation, and this item is currently being retained on this evening's regular agenda. Item 34, ordinance 2025-161, Land Use, Housing, and Transportation Standing Committee recommended that this item be amended. And so this item is being continued to the October 14th council meeting, awaiting that amendment. Items 35 through 37, ordinance 2025-184, 185, and 186. Land Use, Housing, and Transportation Standing Committee recommended approval. However, all three items are to be continued to the October 14th council meeting. Item 38, ordinance 2025-207, Finance and Economic Development Standing Committee recommended approval. And item 39, ordinance 2025-208, Finance and Economic Development Standing Committee forward this item with no recommendation. And at this time, I believe there is a presentation regarding this item.
So, Mr. Mayor and Mr. Donald, is there?
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of council. I think our CAO is planning on doing this. Is he here? Oh, perfect timing, Mr. Donald. I'll just kind of share some intro contextual comments and then hand off to Odie here. Yeah, I think that I'll just start by saying I co-patroning this with President Newbill. I definitely understand what many of my colleagues on council are experiencing and sort of the motivation behind wanting to drop this. I think we hear a lot from our constituents about the weight of taxes and the feeling of paying a lot of taxes in the city and what are we actually getting in return for that. And so, know that I hear that and I understand it. And I think, sometime in the future, we've got to really look at a tax reduction. I do want to make the case that this is not the time for that decision. I think largely, when we think about what we're trying to accomplish in trying to give relief to many of our residents who are feeling the weight of everything costing more. And we start to look at what a 4-cent reduction means for the individual. It only impacts homeowners, property owners, as you all know. And so many of the folks, 57% of our constituents don't actually own their property. They're renters. And so they're not going to see the benefit of this reduction. And then when you actually translate this to individual benefits, you have to own $1 million home to see a $400 reduction in your annual taxes. So for most people in the city who are homeowners and on average their home is, $425,000, they're going to see much less than that. But in the collective, this is a $17 million hit. And it means that we would need to really look at operationally, what does this mean? It means, potentially 150 or so staff across the entire operation, or it means a 13% reduction in our operating budget, or it means a significant reduction to what we give to schools. And so, this I would say for all of those reasons, this is not the year, but then you add to that the reality that we have approved a budget based on the $1.20, and we know that we are heading into a year where we are freezing the tax assessment. And so the compounding impact of knowing that developing next year's budget, we're not going to have the additional revenues from an increased tax assessment. And if we combine that with a reduction in revenues, we would be in a particularly difficult place to make that decision. So that's why I've co-sponsored this ordinance with President Newbill. I really do believe that somewhere down the road we need to look at tax relief, and then in the meantime we need to think about how are we relieving things for our most vulnerable residents who are struggling with this most. I do not think this is the way for us to get there, yeah, for all the reasons I've stated, I think we need to keep it at $1.20. And I'll let Mr. Donald speak to the presentation that he's prepared. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Bula.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, council, or afternoon. I guess it's about evening. Thank you for allowing me a few minutes to give you an overview of the impacts of the real estate proposed tax reduction, as well as comparing that to us keeping it in place now. I think I'll just highlight some of the things that the mayor said, which is, and just kind of reiterating what we talked about in finance. I think the first piece is you have a budget plan that you passed, and in that budget plan, it's based off the 120. So I know we talked at length about making sure that we honor the commitments we make, including when you pass legislation, we make sure that we honor that legislation and we deliver on it. I think doing the same thing with the budget is something that is extremely prudent for us to do. Good. Okay. So in general, so one, I think we've talked about this, but I'll go over it again for the edification of the public. First, your general property taxes are the number one source for which you have to produce your budget. So you're at about 57% of all of your revenue is brought in from your general property taxes. In addition to that, the second largest areas are other local taxes, and then the funds that we get from the federal and state government, which we know are being reduced dramatically at this time. Again, our largest revenue source is our real estate tax revenue. I think one unique piece, and I probably should have harped on it a little bit more in this presentation, is that not only does this fund the general operations that we have here, but it's also our main sources for how we fund schools. And so schools being a major part of our budget, I think around 40% of our general operator, our total budget, this pot that we have, this available funding that we have is very small when we think about it as a whole, is that we've got one pot of money that is finite, and we don't want to increase the burden on our taxpayers. And so the commitments to employee salaries, Richmond Public Schools, as well as just the level of service for departments. I think as the council passed the budget this year, I had the opportunity to go back and look at the things that were very important to you. And one thing was the level of service that we provide to our residents. You want that to improve. It's very difficult to do that if we reduce the amount of resources that's available to deliver that service. In addition to that, we're also funding our capital program, for which you'll see the impact of what happens there when we reduce our budget plan. Here, when you look at what a 1 cent reduction means, so for every penny, we'll call it about $4.3 million in revenue. So this proposed reduction out of our budget plan, it will reduce about $17.3 million, in addition to about $50 million in capital project support. already facing a variety of challenges. And so when we think about that finite amount of money that we have, you have to think about all of the things that we pay for. So one, there's a rising cost of services in both contracts and personnel. I think when you did the actual really great thing to make sure that we took care of our frontline and other employees, the cost of our collective bargaining agreement, while potentially long overdue, is costly and it does increase. I think one of the things that we showed that I'll go into here in a second is that on average it's about a $29 million annual increase, but that's not 29 million spread over a few years. That is compounded, meaning every year it increases by that much. We also have escalating cost of materials and labor shortages for which our budget is responsible for covering. Natural disasters for which we've experienced some, as well as infrastructure emergencies, which have been well renowned. Looking back at the January, we'll call it water crisis that occurred, being able to make sure that we can cover those costs is also important and something that we must be prepared for. Housing affordability, I think, we have beaten that horse to death and brought it back to life and beat it again. We know that that's an important thing here in the city of Richmond, and ensuring that we have affordability and are providing resources forward for our residents is something that we want to make sure that we do, so that 56% of residents that the mayor talked about have an opportunity to find an affordable home that they can live in and be comfortable, as well as cybersecurity and some of the technology activities. With that, we also have an assessment freeze coming, and that is definitely going to impact the resources that we have available as we try to identify a new formula with our partners at RPS, as we try to improve on services. It is important for us to be able to have enough resources, and freezing our assessments, which will actually correct some of this issue so that you're not actually passing the budget and your tax rate at different times, is something that I'm not certain is prudent for us to try to get ahead of by reducing the taxes. Doing it at the same time, which we're working on now through the assessment freeze, is our opportunity to really right-size this. Doing so now is a little bit dangerous. We also have rising debt service obligations. Talked about this a little bit in finance, but we have a debt ceiling here that is very unique and something that provides an additional challenge. So these rising debt costs really reduce the city's ability to fund new initiatives without that additional revenue. And so we have to be thoughtful about the impact of our debt service on our budget. The one piece that a lot of folks forget, while it's not the biggest piece, it is definitely one that's important. When you think about the retirement costs, those folks who have been great partners and contributed to the city, sometimes 25 years, I think fireheads are 25 and out, our police officers, our frontline workers, and those others who are in our retirement system, about $66 million by FY30 is what we're looking at, that number growing to 5% annually, that we have to have the resources to be able to provide for. Rising healthcare costs. That's an area in which I think, it's no secret to us, but we're making decisions on our healthcare activities right now. So we're expecting those total expenses to rise as well. They've already been rising at a rate of almost 3% annually currently. And that's not just here, that's everywhere around the country. And I think today we got the news that with potentially, I guess we're calling it Obamacare now, having some restrictions, those costs are only expected to skyrocket. And we don't actually know what that full impact is going to be on us. But we know the cost isn't going down, it's only going up. And so, again, I think we've done the right thing and we'll continue to do the right thing, and that's investing in our workforce. You got to hear from SEIU, and they provided a very compelling testament at the Finance Committee about the importance of taking care of our workforce, for which I fully agree with. In doing so, we have to make sure we're able to honor our commitments. So when you look at this slide, while we talk about a $29 million average cost, we have to look at what that cost equates to over time. So in this year, it's an additional $27 million. That cost doesn't go away. That 27 is now fixed. The next year, when you add those additional costs to it, it's projected to be about $55 million in additional costs. Once we get 3 years out, we're looking at about $84.8 million in additional costs. Those costs are not going backwards. They're continuing to rise, and we want to make sure that we have enough money to meet our commitments. So as the city grows and our coffers grow, we're able to take care of our workforce that's working so hard on our behalf. We also have to look at our CIP, which we have some challenges coming up. We have things that we have to pay for in relation to our infrastructure and our capital. $300 million projected for the John Marshall Court building, $100 million plus in bridge replacements, about $64 million for the main library renovation, $40 million for the flood wall levee and the dam maintenance, for which we know when we talk about our water infrastructure, emergency situations are just 1 day away, if that long. $10.5 million in amenities for parks, buildings, and trails that exist that we have to be able to maintain. And I think all of us want to improve that infrastructure even more than what we have planned. And so a lower tax rate just simply does not support our services. It actually undermines essential services that are already budgeted for this year. It takes money off the table instead of ensuring that we're able to meet our commitments. Got potentially reduced funding for education, public safety, and collective bargaining, because the money does have to come from somewhere. Got the potential elimination of certain positions that might include frontline workers. You definitely have a reduction in services to the community, because if your plan is for X and we move it to Y, again, something has to be reduced. It also impacts our long-term growth, especially when we're looking at that assessment freeze. Not having enough resources hurts just about everything, and it hinders our investment in critical infrastructure. We also have the risk of a credit rating downgrade, which I've gone into at length about. And so lots of different risks, and we have to make quality decisions, whatever the council decides. But the key is for us to make sure you know what the potential risks are. I also think what's very important is who benefits and how, because I don't think we've told that story. Sent out the council this morning a memorandum that just highlights the actual impact for our homeowners. And remember, 56% of those who are inhabiting our city are actually renters. But for those who are in this real estate cycle, if you look at the impact based on their real estate assessment, where it's a $100,000 home all the way up to a $3 million home, the impact of your reduction to them is one that might be considered nominal, while the impact to the city and our ability to deliver service could be considered catastrophic. If we look at a home that's around 200,000, I'll use that as an example. The annual savings for a tax reduction is about $80 that they would see. That's annually. About $80. Monthly, about $6.67. Daily savings, about 22 cents per day. We have to ask ourselves, is that impact for that resident one that is worth a reduction in trash service or a reduction in other necessary services, our inability to hire police and firefighters? And I think that's the question that we're trying to answer. with that, I'll pause and take questions if the council has any.
Members, at this time, are there any questions for Mr. Donald? Councilwoman Gibson.
Thank you, Madam President. One point of clarity our question is regarding the current fiscal year budget that we're in right now. You said it's based on $1.20, and I believe I agree with that. I'm clear on that. I want to make sure I'm clear or there's clarity on the amount the assessment is based on. So while it's true that we budgeted based on $1.20 as the rate, given that our fiscal year runs July to July and the tax year runs January to December, it's my understanding that during the budgeting process, the budget is developed using the known assessments for the current calendar year, tax year, and then a projection of the assessment for the following year, right? So basically, the budget we just adopted, which goes from July of 2025 through June 30th of 2026. We developed that with an estimate, a projection of what we would be receiving as tax revenue from July 31st through the end of this year. And so I want to confirm that that's correct. And I also want to, I guess my other point here is, assuming that is correct, where is the math that shows where we are in the budget right now, and what was the projection that the budget was based on for the assessments versus the actual assessment value that's come in?
Great question, because I think you budgeted at about 6%, and what the assessments are looking like is somewhere around 5.5. So your assessments are trending lower than what you actually projected. And so we can work and get you that additional information. And so again, that is the reason why I'm assuming the council has made the decision to freeze assessments to align both the assessment process and the budgeting process, which again, I've said before, think is a great idea. But I also, this is a great example that the budget plan is actually at a higher rate than what you're actually projected to collect in assessments, from what I understand. And so that's one issue. But then the second issue, which I think is just as important, is that the plan for which the mayor and council have passed is one that we would be taking resources out of to basically replan in the middle of your budget. And so all of these things are connected together, and I don't know how you did the process before I got here, but you come up with your budget. At some point, 5 or more council members raise their hand to pass it, and then this is the plan that the city has to go off of and each individual department has to go off of. Now what we are proposing is to say, hey, in the midst of your current delivery, about a quarter in, not fully, but about a quarter in, we're going to say, stop, let's adjust your plan and reduce the amount of services that you can provide, so that individually we can provide an average of about $170 in savings to 44% of our residents. And so I think that is what we're doing. And from what you're asking, I think from my understanding, our assessment rate and our collections are going to be a little bit lower than projected. So there's less money in that projected pot.
So I think it's important and critical that we get some analysis that shows that. Because ultimately, this is the kind of data that we need to be able to be making, reasonable decisions, I think, as it pertains to the budget.
Can I interrupt there for a second? I think going into the budget, you provided a variety of information to create a plan. Throughout the year, it's going to be dynamic. There are going to be things happening throughout the process. Are you saying that throughout the budget year, you want to make adjustments to one, let's say this one piece is to do a reduction in taxes? How else would we, if we're adjusting the plan every quarter, that actually becomes very challenging in delivering high quality services. Right now, we have a temporary issue. This isn't long term. Right now, we're looking at the assessment issue pre-freeze. After the freeze, this does not become an issue anymore because you've aligned your plan with your assessment process, and all of those numbers are there and readily available. And I wouldn't want us to create a long-term issue for a temporary problem. We've actually done the work to be able to resolve the issue, but now we're going to intermittently go back and make an adjustment one-off in the midst of the delivery of our plan. I do want to kind of level set there because as administrators, we need that stability to actually be able to deliver.
Yeah, I'm not sure that you may have misinterpreted my point.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, this body is being asked to make a decision about the property tax rate.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to thank Councilmember Trammell for bringing this to the body now so that we have time. I think it's important to have time to be able to look and give this due diligence.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that as a matter of process, it should be standard for the body to receive this type of analysis as part of our decision-making process. For instance, like where are we with determining the surplus for the fiscal year that's just ended? That seems relevant as we're considering whether or not the rate is where it needs to be. Now, don't get me wrong, right? Like I believe in the power of public services, right? Like I want to give more money to schools. I want to grow the amount of funding that we have for families in need. We have a homeless problem. Like there are a number of things that I would love to see funding for. And I can do that assuming that I have the receipts to be able to prove the point. Because on the other hand, right, what residents are responding to are the reality that, yes, while the rate may be somewhat minimal year over year, for some, yes, for some, no. I mean, there are some folks who are seeing a pretty significant hit, and I recognize that people are concerned about that. But like, since 2022, there are people whose property taxes have doubled, But what they're also responding to as they're getting these assessments are, recognizing that there are headlines about audits that we receive where there's fraud and misuse of funds, and we haven't heard anything from the administration yet. I'm hopeful that your team will work on this, but based on
it's coming next month. Yeah.
Based on those audit findings, right? How is that trickling into impacting the budget, right? If we weren't spending money as appropriately before, what is the net savings and how are we working to improve those efficiencies, and where can we then spend that funding instead? I think people are also really concerned, if you're following the Diamond District, that now there's not enough funding to potentially build the infrastructure there, And that is a vote that the body made prior to my time on this body, which I had concern was made with not enough time to change the funding model for that project. And so to now see that there's some I's which were apparently not dotted gives folks some concern. And so, I think that the points that you make in terms of the possible needs for funding are fair ones. But we need more than a vibe check or, kind of a highlight of concerns. I need documentation that shows with numbers exactly why, what those needs specifically are. I mean, especially as it pertains to collective bargaining, I want to ensure that the amount that we say this is how much collective bargaining is going to cost is accurate. Prior to your time joining us here in Richmond, this body worked and identified possible savings by saying, look, we think the 3% is part of collective bargaining. Let's ensure that that's funded for those workers that are part of collective bargaining. But the pushback was like, well, no, everyone should get it. Well, if everyone gets the 3%, are we saying that's collective bargaining? Because it really doesn't seem like it anymore, right? So, and then we also received a presentation that highlighted that some of the collective bargaining costs were not all part of the general fund, which is what we're talking about right now. So it's important that we receive accurate, comprehensive data to tell the story across the board. And also recognizing that we do have contingencies that are already in place by law or by ordinance as part of our budget process, right? Like by ordinance, we are required to have a 13.6% fund balance as part of the budget, right?
Yeah.
$29 million of that is specifically for reserves for issues and uncertainties like what we are talking about with the changes in the federal government.
I disagree with that, but please continue.
At the end of the day, the line item is called for budgeted general fund operating expenses that are for revenue stabilization contingencies, right? So if we need to stabilize revenue for some reason, then that's a pot of money that can be used. So again, I just want to make sure we're telling a complete picture. And I would love to tell my constituents, this is where we put the rate at, and this is why. But right now, with the information that we have, I'm not quite there yet.
Yeah, and so there are a couple of things that we can do. One, I think in lieu of just highlighting, you talked about a bunch of things that people are concerned about. We should address those. I think the decisions that we're making, though, we should also be very honest about what those are. These are all projections. So you haven't collected. You don't know if you're going to do, because of the change in the environment, you don't know if you're going to collect at 97% or at 91%. Not going to be able to get those answers right now, council members. You have to collect. So that's a part of it. So you have to plan and you have to project. That's important. I think in addition to that, yes, we have enterprise funds. We put away money, again, on projections. We also have quite a few in every government, including this one, legislation that's been passed that sometimes conflicts with each other. I think we talked about the Affordable Housing Trust Fund as one. Multiple ordinances. Tons of money could be used, but it also has those contingencies in place so that you can use those additional dollars when you have unforeseen challenges. That's across the board. Had an emergency in water, couldn't just use funding from your enterprise fund solely to respond to that. There's dollars being utilized when you respond to a senior facility and you provide water and things of that nature. Or you go in and bring Miss Gertrude a blanket, to make sure that she's covered during that time. But there are costs to that the government pays, and those things come out of the general fund. So there are a variety of activities, but again, these are projections. And so while you're looking for exact amounts, we'll make sure to provide you additional details that you're asking for. a lot of this, most of this is based on projections. The real issue is based on the timing in which you receive your assessments, not so much the actual calculations and projections here. And so I think we're, again, agreeing on the what, but not necessarily the how. But thank you for your comments.
Mr. Donald,
Yes, ma'am.
I want to say thank you. There, and we've recorded some of the data that Ms. Gibson is asking for the body to receive. And
Yeah.
so we'll get that to you in terms, and you acknowledged
Oh,
those on the
absolutely.
front end. So we'll make sure you get that so we can have that as a part of the deliberation of budget. Mayor, did you comment before I have it?
Yeah, I mean, I think I wanted to respond to a couple of things that Ms. Gibson brought up. I think part of what people are feeling is the increased tax assessment, the fair market value of what their homes are being assessed at. And, I'm feeling that as a homeowner. And I think, yes, maybe there's a little bit of correction that happens through this, but we really need to address the underlying issue that's driving our, massive increases in fair market value, right? Like we've been a top 5 real estate market for like the last year and a half. And until we do the housing production work, we use all of the tools we can to increase production of housing and meet the demand of people who want to live here in Richmond, that we're not going to make significant differences, especially for the most vulnerable residents among us. So I don't want us to conflate like those two issues, right? Like the tax assessments is one thing, and then the tax rate is another thing that we base our budget on. I also just wanted, I don't know if we're going to get a chance to talk about now or later, but I wanted to talk about the side-by-side. I know you guys are going to vote on that later today.
Just before you move on, because Councilmember Abubakar, did you have a question pertaining to? Okay, so if we could go
Yeah,
there
sure.
first, and then we'll come back, Mayor.
So, first and foremost, I mean, I want to make sure that and we'll talk about this in informal, but there's sort of this moralistic argument that's being made of like, oh, it's only, $120 for somebody, that's not going to keep them in their home, or it's only $40 for somebody, that's not going to keep them in their home. To me, this conversation is much bigger, and it's about our obligation as a city to do what is right, which the state says we should budget at 101% of assessed, like the year prior. I understand that didn't happen this year. Quite frankly, I was naive and ignorant to that process and would have been pushing for it. But I would like to get some sort of commitment that we are going to follow state law and work our budget to be appropriate to state law, as opposed to making an assumption that we can continue to take people's money at $1.20, which is, quite frankly, it's a tax increase. And I also understand the argument about that some of this is external market forces. One, most economists have said, even if we build all of the housing that we're talking about building, which is quite frankly not happening anywhere across the country. Nobody's building the way that they're supposed to be building. We're 15 years behind. Even if we did, that's not to say that prices are going to go down. This is not like the laws of economics have been turned up on their heads in the last 5 years. So I want to be very clear that like more housing doesn't mean that like your house price is going to level out or that it's going to come down. The only lever that we have as a city is our tax rate. So I think that's why this is such an important conversation. And even if we land on the $1.20 because of all the factors listed here, I think the people have a right and we have a responsibility to have a thorough and robust debate around that. Because right now, quite frankly, like there was a whole presentation on the $1.20. I don't know, Ms. Trammell, if you had an opportunity to do a presentation yourself on the $1.16 rate, but that would have been a fair and robust debate. This will be, if we vote on this bill this tonight, it'll be the first time since 2014 that we've pushed through the tax rate before November. Not, it was just introduced 2 weeks ago. We should give time, even if the inevitability is $1.20, we should give time to socialize this with our constituents, to get feedback, because at the end of the day, all of this is fine and good, but what I'm hearing from my people is that they're not saying that this is going to save them from, leaving their house. It's about what we should be doing as a city moving forward and how we're budgeting as a city. Should not make assumptions that we can just take that $1.20.
Yeah, no, you've said, there's a lot of what you've said is totally fair. I do think people also should be presented with like, what is the impact to you? Because some of what you're saying is like, this is a symbolic thing that we need to do for our people. And I would say if people, were given a, ABC multiple choice, like, hey, would you want to take $200 or $400 off your taxes or reduce services or investment in schools? Like, I think people would make different decisions. And I think, it's on all of us to do that engagement and education of our populace so that they actually understand what the impacts are to them and to their city. And maybe that does just require more time. So, I mean, that's ultimately a decision for you all to make. I do want to come back to the sort of economics of more housing, supply and demand. I mean, I think there actually is a robust amount of data of cities across the country who have increased production and as a result have reduced the amount that their housing rates have gone up. I've shared that in a couple of different venues. And I think it's not just me, planning department that are pushing that. But I do think, right now in the federal government, right, Senator Warren, Senator Scott are trying to advance bipartisan legislation that solely has to do with how do we increase housing production, because they have seen the increase of housing production in cities across the country that have done it well have actually impacted the increased rate of housing prices, whether that's rental rates or housing costs. So I think we need to more robustly look at all of that data, and I'm happy to come back and do a presentation about that. But yeah.
And then what
Thank
about
you.
the 101%, like ensuring that we're budgeting at the rollback rate that the state lays out, as opposed to the assumption that we're just going to do $1.20 again next year?
Yeah, I'm happy to look at it. So I'm not as familiar with that state code, and I thought, is that not what our alignment of the tax assessment allows us to do better?
It will,
Okay.
but I mean, at the end of the day, obviously last year we budgeted for more than what, we would not be having this discussion, right? Like if $1.20 met the threshold for the state.
Mhm.
So I just want to make sure that moving forward, right, like this is the time to name it, that like we are going to budget at what the state asks us to budget at, which is 101%, not 105 or 106%.
Got it. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, happy to do a deeper dive on that. I would just say, making that decision now versus when we have the FY27 tax freeze, like I would rather let's put that decision down the road when we know that the FY28 budget will account for both of those years of tax assessment growth and will give us the flexibility to do that. Do you want to add to that, Michelle?
Require us to provide notice of the rollback rate. It does not require us to actually move forward in that direction, which is part of why we're talking about it now. That's the difference. So we will be giving notice of the rollback rate. That's a part of this process.
Sure, but the point is that the default is that if we do nothing, it goes to the rollback rate. And so what I'm saying is, but we budgeted last year for $1.20, which was basically 105% of assessments from last year. So I'm saying if we want to be thoughtful about how we are going to budget and we don't want to get into this pickle again next year, then I would implore us to budget at the rollback rate as opposed to the $1.20.
So again, how we budget this year will be totally different than what we did in the past. I don't want to do the pre-work there. I think you'll be a part of, along with the rest of the council, our kickoff for how we budget, and we'll be doing that process hand in hand moving forward. I think the piece today is really focused on what has been done and put in place, and are we going to move forward with our current budget process and our current budget plan, or are we going to undo it?
Thank you. Mayor, you had an additional comment?
Yeah, I did want to talk through.
Before you go, I'm just relative to Ms. Alberbach's inquiry. RJ is taking a list of the questions so that we can follow up and get back. That was relative to the state and rollback rates, those kind of things. So we'll come back. So Mayor?
Great, thanks. Yeah,
Sorry, Councilmember Trammell?
Yes, I had a couple questions.
Yes.
Thank you. I thought you told him to.
Well, I didn't see yours at first. I was looking at the mayor. So yes, please.
Thank you. Mayor, so if we didn't do anything per se, and it would automatically roll back to what the state would say, which would be maybe $1.13. I think that's what we were told the other night at one of the meetings. I don't know if it was at my meeting or Councilman Jones's meeting. That is in case we don't have enough votes for either one and we don't do anything in time, it would automatically go back to what the state has come up with. Is that true? Okay. I think I'm hearing a lot of people say yes. I just want to say that I know, Mayor, you said a couple of things. I know that I read, I think it was in the Times Dispatch, that the enrollment of children is down in the Richmond Public Schools. That it looks like that some of the enrollment is down all across the city with students now. Also, I've never in my life seen so much development going on in the 8th and 9th district, where I got so many citizens now that are saying we don't want it. And I'm like, how do you stop growth? All this land has been vacant for years and years. We couldn't get nobody to even come over here and even look at the 8th district. Now we got people fighting over buying up the land, and they're not really single family homes. They're apartments, townhouses, and all that, because we all know that it costs so much to build a single family home, considering what you go put apartments and townhouses. So I think that argument is not a very good argument, because I see the revenue that should be coming in by, people. And then another thing, these tenants are going to get hit hard with the landlords, because every day I get calls from different landlords telling me, how do y'all do this? How do y'all sit up there and not think about the people, the ones that are trying to, keep their rents down so that they can keep the people in them when materials gone up, our taxes, your mortgages are going up when you don't have them paid off, your insurance goes up. And then look at a gallon of paint. Look what it costs just for roofing. So they're saying, some people might say, oh, it's what's that little bit? Well, what's that little bit? I hear people tell me we rather have a little bit of breadcrumbs than none at all. And I know that our CAO has been to our meeting. He heard the cries of the people. We're losing our home. How do we continue to stay in our home? Because, medical's gone up. I'm trying to get someone to cut our grass. That's all gone up. What do we do? And these are not just poor people. These are middle-class people that's got good jobs too. They're feeling it. And then trying to put their children in school to feed them, clothe them, all that's gone up too. And it's like people telling me, we don't care. We do care. And I understand that you put all that up there. You gave a presentation. I don't have a presentation to show. All I have is pictures on my phone and my people that are crying out, we need help. And Mayor, I know you campaigned that you felt or you heard their cries when you went out in different areas, not only my district, but other districts, and you heard the people say, please, you become our mayor, help us. Don't forget about us. And I went to your meeting and I think your people said, please don't raise the tax, lower them. They're way too high. And I don't understand, one more thing, I don't understand, why would the president of council put a paper in for $1.20 and you co-patron it? If it was your paper, why didn't you just forward the paper to all 9 members instead of you had a co-patron her paper? Don't understand that.
Well, let me first say, I totally stand with you in the desire to help the folks who are feeling it most. And that's part of what I'm saying here is that I don't think the 4-cent reduction actually helps the people who need it the most, right? We do a lot of other things and need to do more to address affordability for our most vulnerable residents, right? The grant programs that we have for homeowners that are 80% or below the area and median income, protections we have for long-standing homeowners to give them a little bit of a tax refund because we know their assessments are going up, right? I think those are the things that we need to fund and be able to expand so that we're actually impacting the people who need the help the most. So I know I'm completely with you on the need for relief for a large portion of our population. I just don't think that the 4-cent reduction is the right tool for that.
Mayor, you want to know something? You know who you're hurting the worst? Is the middle class and the poor. They're the ones we're pushing out of the city. Think about it. They're the ones that are struggling. And as you said, you're feeling it too, but you make a pretty good salary considering what the people in my district are making.
Yeah, and
They're
I
hurting.
totally
more.
agree that we need to help them. The 4-cent reduction isn't the tool to do that.
Well, let's go 6 cents. Let's go 8 cents. Let's go, let's make it more. You're right. 4 cents is probably not a whole lot.
Yeah.
Why don't you say with me, let's go 6 cents, 8 cents? Why not?
Yeah, because I would say that a more targeted reduction that actually helps that population is what we should be working to craft, as opposed to something that goes across the board and doesn't actually help our most vulnerable residents the most.
Mayor, I'm not arguing with you whatsoever. I'm not arguing with you. Don't want to argue with you. Don't want that. Don't want to go there. But I'm just saying that I was elected to help the people. I go to their houses. I see some of the houses. I don't even know if you would go in them. Where I went the other day and saw what I saw with those little children, grandchildren, and a grandmother trying to raise their children. Not only that, others. But how do I go back and say, hey, the mayor said, what's 4 cents? Or what's 4%? How do I go back and say that to them when they said, please get me some food. My children are hungry. Or please help me get my floor fixed. Get me a roof. Do this for me.
Yeah.
Y'all campaigned together, Reva. You brought the mayor
Absolutely.
to my home. Yes, I did.
I think my encouragement would be, let's look at the actual programs the city runs. That would be way more helpful to those residents than the 4-cent reduction. So happy to pick up that conversation. We can talk a lot more about, all of the other things that we are doing as a city to help vulnerable residents. And I think, residents would actually be really, maybe we need to do more marketing of some of those programs. But I do think residents would be relieved to hear the breadth of programs that we have, not only to help address some of those acute issues, but also to help folks, with the Office of Community Wealth Building, try to get into higher paying jobs and so on and so forth. I mean, I think there's a lot that we are doing and a lot more that we can do.
And one more thing, then I'll be quiet. When these citizens come down here screaming and hollering about stop the rent increases, stop this, you need to go to those landlords and tell them or ask them, how are you going to stop it? And you know what they're going to say? I can't. The mortgages have gone up, insurance has gone up, this gone up, everything's gone up. And how do you expect me to keep these tenants in the houses when I can't afford to do my mortgages because they're not paying the rent, or I can't raise the rent to cover what you all have said again, you can't do this. But yet though Governor Wilder did it in 2008, 27 cents. And I was on council then, and I think and it was no discussion like this. And I didn't have none of this kind of development. We didn't have a Manchester. We didn't have a Scott's Addition, all of that. Look what we got now. And then you can stand up there and say, no, because you don't think that we can do that. to give somebody a little piece of bread than none whatsoever. Thank you,
Yeah.
Mayor.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Ms. Trammell. Thanks.
Thank you. I have one last question, and then we'll come back to you, Councilmember Lynch.
It heard on all of the points, and as you know, I've always been where you are philosophically in trying to redistribute our tax base to the people that need it the most. What I was just looking at, I just have a very, I've found it harder and harder to explain the longer I've been on council, particularly as we've seen double-digit assessment increases, is that our surrounding counties have a similar sized budget, operating budget, similar sized employee base, and they are doing it with, Henrico just reduced their tax rate to 0.83 cents. I believe they knocked it down another 2 cents last year. Chesterfield is right at around $1. Similar operating budget, similar staff. And yet, when people are making a choice about whether or not to stay in the city or go, the middle class and the lower and the lower income folks are saying, "What? Like paying these tax rates is like lighting money on fire that I don't have. I'm receiving, on parity, if not better services in the county. Hate to say it, better, make arguments all you want, better schools, I can send my kid middle school, high school, all the way through. A lot of folks are making that calculation in their head, and I'm finding it harder and harder every year to go back to my constituents and say, look, like city services, the cost of city services, the cost of doing business has increased by X. We've done this much in capital investment. And they're like, well, look at the surrounding counties. They're delivering the same services, if not better. And they've gotten new parks, so I mean, it's just help us, like, what is the answer for folks, right? Because we can't continue to say, we either have to take a hard look in the mirror and really, really have some tough conversations and ratchet it back and tighten up on our own budget, or we have to come up with a way better message for the city and for the people of Richmond, because what people can't do year after year after year is to continue to receive rising assessment costs that go above and beyond the cost of doing business, the cost of the COLA increase that we experience to afford our own payroll, to afford all the other things that we need to adjust for in our operating budget year over year. When people's assessments and what they're paying goes up more, commiserate to the actual cost of operating the city government, people start to scratch their heads, right? They're like, what are you guys doing over here? So, I mean, that is where we really need to have some tough conversations. Are we living within our means? Anyway.
Yeah, I mean, clearly there's work that we need to do to tighten up the operation. And I would say, like, we've just gotten the team here in the last couple of months to do that work. Give us time to, like, really, and that's probably not going to happen in a year, right? Like, that's a multi-year process to really, build the kind of efficiency that we need to. And in some places, it's actually going to take more investment, because it's investments in technology that we haven't made that we need to become a more efficient deliverer of services. It's pillar number one on my priorities, right? Thriving City Hall. It's all about improving the delivery of government services, but we need some runway to get there. So I would say, we need some time to when we do the county city. But I would also say, like, part of your answer to your constituents should be, like, historic disinvestment because of bad policy, right? Like, we have seen, after Brown versus Board of Education, after the tax base left the city, we have seen the city struggle since the 1950s to be able to capture that wealth and put it where it needs to go in terms of our infrastructure, our people, our organization. just in the last decade have we started to see those trends change, right? Like we've started to see growth in the city. People want to be here, and now our revenues are growing again. And so we've got a lot of catch-up work to do as an organization and institution to get where the counties are. It's also an apples to oranges comparison in some cases, right? Like, do we want to be a city that doesn't support a ton of youth programming, that doesn't support public pools, that has 800 miles of sidewalk? I think these are decisions that ultimately we have to make, but that's what democracy is about, right? We've got to listen to our population and say, hey, what do you guys want the city to actually deliver on, and then build that into our budget. So I totally heard. And I think this is the work before us over the next few years to say, what do we want to fund and what do we not want to fund, and how much does it take? Because tax revenue is the way that we get there.
Councilman, thank you, Mayor. I'm trying to wrap up questions here
that's
because I
great.
know that you want to provide additional comment, but Councilwoman Robertson and then Councilwoman Gibson.
Thank you. One question, and I think this may be more for the attorney. Is there a time period as it relates to the rollback rate that council has to make a decision and vote on it unless the roll-off rate goes into effect?
Madam Chair, Ms. Robertson, thank you. So the state law requires the city to set the rate or to send, can you hear me?
hear you.
40, to send notices 45 days before the effective date, which is January 1st. So it has to be adopted, the new rate, if there is a new rate, by your November 10th meeting, I want to say. That's November 10th. And the rollback rate is $1.14, I believe. Does that answer your question?
Vote on the rate, otherwise, as of January 1st, the rollback rate goes into effect,
Yes,
correct?
ma'am.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Ms. Jones, let me just say this screen is not, so I did not see you on. I was trying to make sure I got to everybody who had not spoken and then back to those who, okay.
Ms. Robinson kind of stole my thunder. Thank you, Madam President. I was going to ask a similar question around what is the period that we have relative to the rollback, but the attorney already answered. And I just want to say that despite what this looks like, I'm really glad we're having this conversation. And I want to thank my colleagues for bringing it up. I was here last year when this came up and Ms. Trammell brought it to the body, and it was the same situation of a chicken and egg of trying to figure out, do we do it? Do we don't do it? And, someone sitting in a similar situation as she is representing the 9th District, I wholeheartedly support and respect fully the challenges. But on the upside of that, it is kind of hard because we know, right, what projects are in the pipeline. We know when we budget what we're going to build, what we're not going to build. We know what we're going to pay for. And the realization is, it takes the difference in the other districts to really bubble up what's happening in our districts. And so it really raises the question of when are we going to prioritize? Because to keep hearing the way we talk about folks that live in the South Side and the 8th District, I'm just going to be 100%, it tears my stomach up. Because they are humans, and the way we are going back and forth, the most vulnerable, all this language, let's get to a place of where we are treating everybody the same, no matter where you live and no matter what your zip code is. Because the more we go back and forth and try to compare, should we do it because it's affecting the 8th and the 9th District? Should we not do it? How much they're going to get? And I asked for that. Yes, I did, because I want to be able to say, hey, this is what it looks like if I decide to say yes or no. But I we're talking about these commitments. Oh, we went into this budget and we said we were going to do this. Where's the commitments to the people? Where's the commitments and when do we get to that place? Because we can sit here and argue for days about who has less, who has the most. And honestly, I'm tired. All of us know what it is. We know what the challenges are. We know we are welcoming development and all of these things that are coming. And we know that as they come, we know that it's also hurting these other initiatives that have not been funded in forever. And so I think I do agree, we do, and we should be more, we should have the ability to say why we support a thing and a lot of times you do feel handcuffed because you don't know all of the ins and outs of like where we're going. When you talk about, it's going to hurt services or impact this, and I believe that. And to be honest, it puts me in a very precarious position because I'm learning about things happening in my district that I don't even know about. So if you're telling me voting to lower the rate is going to affect that, then in my head, I'm like, well, how is that going to affect the things that I don't even know that's supposed to be coming? So we really have to get serious about this conversation. I think this is a right time that it has come up. We are getting ready to kick off this budget process, and I think we really, really need to be honest about what we are talking about here. And what we are talking about is the areas that have been underfunded. That's what we're talking about. When we really are talking about the rate, that's what we really are talking about. And so we need to be just honest and transparent about that and figure out how we are going to compare apples to apples. If you say, this is what you're going to get if you do roll the rate back. But then on the flip side of that is we can give you a rebate or a refund. That's still a one-time. So as I'm just playing it in my head and the more and more I'm trying to process it, not only as the person elected to support these folks, but also as a citizen, I'm like, for one time, how is that really going to help and how on either side? So I would just really love to see and hear a path forward that is going to really help us communicate this to residents and really help and some real relief that is going to make a difference. And I just can't see that, honestly, when I know that we still going to be building. We doing all these things. So how is that really going to change the dynamic? It just seems like it's a circle that we going around that there's really no real relief. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. Councilwoman Gibson, and then Mayor will come back to you.
Thank you, Madam President. I just wanted to add one other point. I do think it's unique that we have not changed the rate as a city since 2008, either up or down. And I think that speaks to the fact that there has not been a process that is robust enough to allow us to truly look to see what our needs are. Certainly in 2008, assessments were were more stagnant. However, you were still seeing a lot of change happening in the city. And so I just think that I understand it's not popular to be talking about taxes, but I think that we should have the courage to be able to have this discussion and to do it in a way that we're actually showing how we got to where we're getting. Piggybacking on Councilwoman Jones's point about, making sure that we're supporting everyone. I think another data source that would be really very helpful to see would be the number of applications we've had to the rent relief program. I heard recently from residents at a recent Civic Association meeting that their applications were stalled, that they were not able to complete the process. But it would be very helpful to know how many people have applied, what the status is of them. And I know we recently made changes to the program. So again, we've made, the body made policy changes. What have we gotten from that? What has been the effect? Have we seen more people in the program? How is that impacting our budget? all of that is important information, I think, for us to be looking at. And I request that that is another piece of the puzzle that we include in this dialogue. The last thing I wanted to say too is that yes, there is, I believe, paper that was a decision to make things flat, to freeze. But I also think, look, if circumstances change, we as a body can be nimble and can change that, right? We can decide to assess again, or we can also reevaluate the rate if necessary to be able to get the revenue that we need. That's how government should work, right? We should be nimble, we should be responsive. And so, at the end of the day, to me, the fact that we have so much discussion about the assessment, it's odd. I moved from California where your tax rate was based on what you bought the house for. And for me, as a person who was a first-time homeowner, it's like it provided some sense of stability to know, okay, this number is always going to be the same and the rate might change. Here, where there's so many variables, being both the assessment and the rate, it really provides a lot of unease for folks who just don't know what to expect and they have no control over it, right? It's a little different when your rate goes or your assessment goes up because you've put an addition on your house. But, there are neighborhoods where you're seeing LLCs make lots of development changes and or people that come in and they flip a house and, when your next door neighbor gets granite counters, all of a sudden your property tax goes up. Right? Like that's something you have no control over. And so I do think we need to be thinking about ways to provide more stability for our residents with the understanding that, yes, we still need to be able to deliver on services. And so I think we can do that if we do our work. We show the numbers. And yes, it's going to be a projection, but you know what? As I understand it, that's the work of a budget department, right? That's the work of the finance department. We're always working on projections, and our residents deserve to see a true breakdown of those projections before we make a decision that right now they don't feel like is coming from a place of trust.
Thank you. Councilwoman Lynch, and we are going to close out the questions so that we get comment from the mayor and then you all can get a break before we go into next session.
This is just a housekeeping and format question. As a reminder, this is a really important conversation, and this is a conversation that we should be having informal when the paper is before us, and we should have had the benefit of having this discussion during formal, televised, when the public has full access, knows that it was going to be on the agenda, was prepared to speak to it. We have to then we just talked and had a very important conversation, but for almost an hour, and we didn't give the public the benefit of really hearing that discussion. Now we have to recycle all of these statements, comments, and rehash it out all over again. We really, really should have waited, and we should have publicized that this discussion was going to happen. And we should have had it during formal, and I'll just say that.
Thank you, Councilwoman Lynch. Members received notification on Thursday, and then the presentation was posted on Granicus starting from Friday morning that the community would have access to. I am not saying that we cannot do more. I'm just saying that at least it was in that venue. Mayor, did you last?
Yeah, sure. I just wanted to, because I haven't had the chance to have the conversation with everybody about just where I stand on side by side. I know that going through the budget process left a lot to be desired for all. Being new to it, I was like, I'd love to have more time, more runway, more conversation. I know many of you as well. And so, what I feel like the resolution that came out of that was the formation of a budget task force, right? And Vice President Jordan, Councilmember Robertson, our CAO, our budget director, both of our chiefs of staff were involved in, a multi-week process to kind of look at what did we do in the budget process, what worked, what didn't work, and then how do we make it better. And at least the proposal that came out of it, as I read it, seems, it starts earlier, so there's a longer time runway. There's more opportunity for back and forth between the administration and city council, and then there's more opportunity for community engagement and feedback, which I think all of us really yearn for. And so, I looked at the thoughtful, deliberative process and felt like, okay, that represents a lot of how we make this process better. In evaluating the concept of the side by side, and I think the budget task force did the same thing and said, what, the potential unintended consequences of this are too high a risk for us to do it. And so the budget task force recommended against it. It went to finance committee. Finance committee did not recommend it. And then I think for me is also really relying on the expertise of the CAO that we hired, who has done budget development in multiple cities. And I think, I want to honor the internal process on our side to really do the work we need to do to get the budget to where we need to get it, and then to hand it over to you all. And so for all of those reasons, I want to support, our administrative leader in Mr. Donald, and really take the feedback from the budget task force to say, hey, let's not do the side by side right now. Happy to look at it again. If we go through and do what the budget task force recommended over the course of the next year, and it doesn't fill the need, or there's a need for new iterations, happy to continuously improve the process.
Thank you. And I know there'll be more discussion when the paper comes forward.
Great.
So, Madam, I'd like to go to the last item on the Mayor. I think that's, yes.
Okay.
That paper will come forward. There'll be more discussion, questions by the body, comments, et cetera. So, Madam Clerk, I think there's one additional item on the docket. Is that correct?
That is correct. Item number 40, Resolution 2025-R035. That paper was continued from the September 8th council meeting. It's currently being retained on this evening's consent agenda. Regular agenda, but I believe you may want to move that. Is that?
Yes, I'd like to request that it be moved to the consent agenda. The CAR staff has been in communication, and the entity has been compliant with what CAR is recommending. So I'd like to request that it be placed on the consent agenda.
So if that is the consensus of council, then that paper will be moved to the consent agenda instead of staying on the regular. So is that the consensus? Item number 40, Resolution 2025-R035.
Okay. If no other questions or comments, I'm going to go on and adjourn the informal meeting. And you will take a break, and we'll return for a formal session. This meeting stands adjourned.